So, with all the ugliness that exists in our country right now, especially as it pertains to race relations, I can't think of a better time to have a discussion around the notion or the concept of healing community. I'm a poet. I've written poetry all my life, but for the past 20 years, I've been very intentional about using poetry as a vehicle for activism and social justice. I've done numerous commissions. I've facilitated poetry workshops as it pertains to poetry writing and performance all over the country. And that work led to me landing a position as the poet in residence of the American Jazz Museum, which is located in the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District of Kansas City, Missouri. There, my responsibilities included helping to develop education programs and conducting tours through our permanent exhibit. Some of you may be old enough to remember the book or the movie, The Accidental Tourist. I began referring to myself as the accidental docent because I had never dreamed that I would have a career in the museum industry. It was while working at the American Jazz Museum that I came to the realization that Black cultural institutions could be spaces for community healing. I came to that conclusion based on several different incidents, but one in particular comes to mind. And just to offer you some context, the American Jazz Museum is a very popular destination. People from all over the country come there to tour the exhibit and to learn more about Kansas City jazz. On one particular morning, the tour schedule had gotten jacked up. And there were several different large groups that converged on the museum at the same time. So much so that at one point, the museum exhibit was filled to capacity. Now, there was one large group that was waiting in the lobby. They were all white. They had traveled some distance to get there, and they became increasingly frustrated. And I was there trying to explain the situation, apologizing, asking them to be patient, and the more time went on, the ruder their comments got. There were some disrespectful comments that were made, and at one point I just said, well, it beats being in the belly of a slave ship. Well, there was this real awkward silence and some uneasy laughter. And I went on to explain to them that the Jazz Museum wasn't just about jazz, it was about using jazz as a lens to study American history and to study race relations. And I told them that the angst and the frustration that they were feeling, the fact that they were being denied access to a space that they felt that they had a right to, gave them just a very small inkling of what it feels like to be a Black person every day. And it led to a very powerful discussion. I took them through the exhibit, the conversation continued, and by the time that group left, several of the people who had been making those comments were shaking my hand, thanking me. I even got a couple of hugs. And I would like to think that people in that group left that day with a different perspective. I remember another incident with another group that came to the Jazz Museum, also entirely white. It was a church group. And I asked the pastor who brought them there that day what had made her decide to bring her congregants to the Jazz Museum. And she said that the congregation was predominantly white, very wealthy, and that they had become so insular, she felt that it was important to help them understand how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, how to move beyond their normal experiences and to learn more about other cultures. Many of them had not even traveled to that part of town. So again, as we toured the exhibit, we had a very powerful discussion, so much so that the museum began to collaborate with that church to sponsor programs that dealt with race relations. And so it was very productive. After that experience, I had an opportunity to work with a group of local musicians known as the Jazz Disciples on a recording project. And one of the things that the museum was established to do was to be a cultural anchor for the 18th and Vine area, which had fallen into disrepair prior to the advent of the museum. And so thinking about the spiritual notions that I had had with the group that came from the church and this idea of revitalizing that community, I wrote the following poem that I would like to share with you, and it's called Revival. There is a place where parched lips kiss warped reeds and cramped fingers stroke strings and keys, filling the air with melodies. And resurrected rhapsodies capture the cadence of ancient chants where shackles are removed and our ancestors dance in anticipation of liberty. And every note that's played is dedicated to their memory. There is a place where each heartache and every sharp pain can be soothed and smoothed by medicinal refrain. The story of King David makes it plain. And it came to pass that when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. You see, this divinely inspired requiem came forth from a glorious past, and although it defies description, we choose to call it jazz. And ever since this magical music emerged from space and time, it has found a permanent residence on 9+9 and Vine. Someday soon you'll travel there to escape from cell phones and emails and faxes, from being overworked and underpaid and paying too many taxes. This is the place where even struggle kicks off his shoes and relaxes. And the only war that will ever take place is the battle of the saxes. This is the place where jazz is served up as a sensual delight, and it smells like grandmother's chitlins because she always cooks them just right. And it tastes like the peach cobbler she bakes that gets better with every bite. And it feels like love's very first kiss shared in the soft moonlight. And it looks like Susanna Jones when she wears that red dress. Lord, what a beautiful sight. And it sounds like the jazz disciples cool on a blue Monday night, or like Gabriel's trump at the rapture, just before we take flight. So these ministers of music are awaiting your arrival, wanting to provide you with orchestral comfort as we witness the revival, because jazz, like matter, can't be destroyed, it only changes forms. And the historic intersection of 18th and Vine is where jazz will be reborn. Then we will cherish this noble noise and glow in the cool of its heat as the caramel-coated cacophony provides a sonically hypnotic beat that can only ever be heard through the tapping soles of the feet. And as willing slaves to the rhythm, our freedom will be complete. Now, I've moved on from the American Jazz Museum. I'm now working at the Black Archives of Mid-America, and I know that I'm speaking from a local perspective, but I think the idea has national and even global resonance. So while working at the Black Archives, which is a research institution that helps people understand the contributions that African Americans have made to the development of Kansas City, I've noticed time and time again, whenever white visitors come through those doors, they're really upset at the fact that they didn't know certain things about our history. Some of them grew up during the time when segregation was a reality in Kansas City, but they weren't aware of the fact that black people weren't allowed to move any further south than 27th Street prior to 1955. And so they began to understand that when marginalized people or people of color are left out of our history books, that all of us are done a disservice because this is our shared history. It's also had a profound impact on the black people that come through those doors, particularly the young people. There was an exhibit, a traveling exhibit that came through the Black Archives just this past summer. It was called For All the World to See, Visual Culture and the Struggle for Civil Rights. And the exhibit focused on how black people had been historically represented with stereotypical images like Sambo and Step and Fetch It and those things. And it moved into the 70s when black people gained more agency in terms of how they represented themselves with people like Gordon Parks and the advent of the publications of Jet and Ebony magazine. One of the artifacts in that exhibit was a letter opener that was shaped like an alligator. And in the mouth of the alligator was the head of a black man. And it was a visual reference to a time in this country when people who hunted alligator in places like New Orleans and Florida literally used black babies as alligator bait. So one of the students who saw that artifact decided to write a poem about it. She was on a poetry team that was competing nationally, and I've been working with her and the team to prepare for that competition. When she wrote that poem and shared it with the rest of her team members, they all cried. All of them came from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, but were all impacted in such a way that they understood that it was important for them to take on the responsibility of educating themselves, because so many of these incidents are left out of the history books. They went on to compete nationally, and that poem helped them to go to the semifinals, which is the furthest that any team from Kansas City had gone up to that point. So that work is very rewarding for me. The other thing working in these institutions has allowed me to do is something that one of my favorite poets, Roger Bonaire Agard, calls occupying whiteness. The idea being that as Black people, we need to be intentional about creating relationships with key white people, key institutions, and helping them to understand that with the privilege that they have access to, they can be allies in helping to dismantle this whole idea of whiteness and the systems of white supremacy. And so I had an opportunity to do an ekphrastic poetry workshop. Ekphrastic poetry is just poetry that's written in response to visual art or a visual image. But to do this workshop at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, which is one of the best art museums in the country, I would argue, but has a complicated history sometimes of being exclusive. Things have changed a lot in the past several years, and they've become far more inclusive. But at the time that I was doing this workshop, things were a little bit different. And I was going through the exhibit trying to find a piece of art that I could respond to, and I came across this painting by Joseph Hirsch, a Jewish painter who created the painting in 1946. And it's a painting of a Black woman who's obviously distraught. She's holding a Black baby that's crying. And we learn from the title of the painting what's actually happening. And it's called Lynch Family. And we know then that this woman has just lost her husband to a lynching. And Joseph Hirsch wanted to offer that painting as a voice of protest against the proliferation of lynching that was taking place in our country at that time. And so I would like to share the poem that I wrote in response to that painting, and it's called Lynch Family Blues. Went out swinging last night, baby. Hope you didn't wait up for me. Said I was swinging all night, baby. Did you stay up late for me? I wasn't swinging in no joint, darling. I was out on the limb of a tree. Now, I'm walking on air, baby. Feels almost like I'm free. My feet steady kicking the wind. Yeah, I'm close to being free. And for the first time in my life, baby, white folks is looking up to me. Hear me, son, your daddy loves you. Keep hanging on to hope. You the man of the house now. Gotta help your mama cope. Daddy won't be coming home no more. I reached the end of my rope. And that's the Lynch Family Blues. Now, after working at the Black Archives of Mid-America for the past 4 years, I recently accepted a position at the Bruce R. Watkins Cultural Heritage Center, another Black institution. I'm really excited about continuing this work because I truly believe in my heart that Black cultural institutions can provide a space for community healing, that they can help offer counter-narratives and shed light on overlooked aspects of our shared history, that they will allow us the opportunity to confront the pain of our past, the ugliness of the present, and hopefully inspire the necessary action that leads toward authentic community healing. Thank you so much.